All right. Welcome, everyone, to the newest installment of the Solutions to Homelessness web series. I am still Tom Litwicky and serve as CEO for Old Pueblo Community Services here in wonderful, hot Tucson, Arizona. Thank you for taking your time to join us for lunch today. And yeah, appreciate it very much. Looks like in the chat someone has a echo. I don't know if that's others or if that's just person in the chat, but um, we're here today to talk about emerging models to address homelessness. As everyone I think on here is aware and has come to this is this increasing crisis of folks who are experiencing homelessness throughout the nation. And we are thrilled today to have Nicole Martinez, who serves as executive director of Mesilla Valley Community of Hope in New Mexico. What am I trying to say? In where in New Mexico?
Las Cruces.
Las Cruces. Why couldn't I say that? Las Cruces, New Mexico. Um, we also we were going to have Tisha Tallman if you're in Tucson, Arizona. You know, Tisha serves as CEO for Primavera Foundation, and she was not able to make it. OPCS partners with a project that we'll be talking about today. And so I'm going to cover that. So I'm going to ask questions and answer questions at the same time. Should be fun. Um, we went when we started thinking about doing outdoor sleeping space. I We looked at it with the city and with Primavera and Nicole and the work that they are doing at Camp Hope, a community of hope, really just shouted out as a model that had demonstrated some effectiveness and the ability to help people stay alive while waiting for that all important voucher into permanent housing. And so we went out there, which was really fun, and we got to see what they were doing, and it really served as an inspiration for us to start a similar project called Star Village here in Tucson. So we thought it would be great to have Nicole here to talk a little bit about what they're doing in Las Cruces and how what their experience has been, and then also to talk a little bit about our local project, Star Village, which is a much more recent project, and how that's going. So, without further ado, I will pass it over to Nicole to talk a little bit about what her team's doing.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, happy to be joining you today to talk a little bit about Camp Hope. Big picture here, the Mesilla Valley Community of Hope is the nonprofit, the umbrella organization here. Started out as a day shelter and then evolved to providing things like income support. We have a day labor program and Social Security disability assistance. And then, of course, lots of different types of housing connections. We own a few properties. We have a lot of vouchers. We also have project-based vouchers and communities that we offer those housing connections for people. And we are on City of Las Cruces property, and co-located with us, we also have a federally qualified healthcare center with doctors, nurses, behavioral health specialists. We have a daycare, we have a soup kitchen, and a food pantry. So all within a stone's throw, we have all of these organizations sharing property and clients and resources, sort of a one-stop shop to addressing homelessness and poverty. And we realized that we didn't have very many options for sheltering folks. And so in 2011 is when we started Camp Hope. The Mesilla Valley Community of Hope has been here with its doors open since about 1998, but Camp Hope entered the scene in about 2011, located just off to the side of our building, so on property that was also owned by the city of Las Cruces that we had to undergo a lot of rezoning and final site plans and all kinds of planning and development models to make sure that we were zoning everything to code to allow for ensuring that we have a safe space for people to stay. So when we started Camp Hope, it's largely self-governing. It emerged from some leaders who were experiencing homelessness. And since this was city property, city decided to crack down on having people leave since camping wasn't an allowable activity. Hence us having to rezone the property to a planned unit development to allow for that. But when we designed it, we had, our final site plan, went through all of the departments at the city, and we ended up agreeing on that we would have spots for 50 people. So it's 50 people that can sleep at Camp Hope. Last fiscal year, we served 194 people that came through Camp Hope. We do have bathrooms out there and an outdoor kitchen. And we have a couple of about 3 different gathering places for folks. One of them is attached to sprinklers, which is pretty important right now because we're right behind you on the heat index there. We do, again, try to transition as many folks as we can into permanent housing. Those figures can be a little different, from year to year, because we might have somebody that, say, got into Camp Hope in June, but our fiscal year ended and they didn't get housed till the next year. So we might be counting them a lot later, or they may leave Camp Hope and come back and then get housing. But overall, just in general, our organization housed over 2,000 people last fiscal year, with many of the different opportunities that we have. And we are currently building 50 units of supportive housing, tenant-based vouchers, and a few state project-based vouchers right here on the Community of Hope campus, so that we can even more quickly transition people out of Camp Hope and into their own apartment unit. Our primary funding sources that we've relied on, we do an annual fundraiser for Camp Hope. It's called Tents to Rents. It has its own website. And we get people in our community to raise money for us for 6 weeks. The first year we did it, I think we made about $13,000, paid for things like tents and solar lighting, insurance, things like that. And then over the years, as we've got better and better at it with our fundraising development committee, I think last year we made $157,000. We also utilize that as a funding source to transition folks into their own apartments. So we're paying security deposits, we're paying people's arrears to get lights on and get right with their landlords, first month's rent, all of the things that you would need to transition somebody out, as well as everything that we need to operate the camp, minus paying for staff. So the way that I do pay for staff, we do have coordinated entry funding because we have HUD Continuum of Care funding and housing vouchers. And so every person that comes to Camp Hope has to do a coordinated entry. So in that, we are able to fund 2 staff who do coordinated entries and then prioritize folks for housing. Once that happens, and those housing caseworkers, if it's rapid rehousing or they're a veteran or it's permanent supportive housing, they are coming out with all the touches with folks who are staying at the camp to get them transitioned into the appropriate housing for them. Those staff work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and we all go home. So between 5 o'clock and the next morning at 8 a.m., there's a safety team, a management team at the camp who are residents themselves that operate the camp and that check in with staff on the next day, or if they need to, calling us after hours. But typically they're able to, with the support of 2 paid security guards by the city of Las Cruces, manage keeping people safe at Camp Hope, not just overnight, also on the weekends as well. And that is a brief overview of Camp Hope, and stay tuned for the moderated discussion.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, we've got some pretty tough questions, although maybe now that I have to answer questions too, I might not make them quite as tough. We'll see. Um, so wanted to talk a little bit about Star Village before we start. So Star Village is something that was initially promoted by advocates within the community that work within the homeless community, saying, hey, we need to have something. And as long as I've been in this work, I think advocates have been saying, we need something for people while they're unsheltered and can't get into permanent housing. So how do we have something that's like a sanctioned camp or whatever, different terms for it. And the city of Tucson reached out to the Primavera Foundation and to Pueblo Community Services to say, how do we work together? And we're in a fortunate situation for this pilot that the city of Tucson had funding that they were able to apply to this for the first year. And it seems like there'll be some funding also for the second year. And the intention of this is really to learn and understand, and then to grow this potentially to other sites, which the city does not admittedly have funding for. So this was a nice situation for us to learn how do we do this in the most efficient and cost-effective way, and how do we be effective in helping people stay alive while they're dealing with unsheltered homelessness. And so Primavera operates the actual site, and there's 25 or so tents. There are large tents that are like emergency medical type tents that you might use in wildfires and things. So they're fairly insulated. You can have air conditioning, you can have heat, it has electricity, and they use those for folks who, when they're eating or when they're attending any kind of a service, or when they are just needing to get out of the heat. They can have their pets. So that's, also important to get out of that heat from the standpoint of various dogs and such. It is designed for women initially, and the idea was that we would find those folks within the area of the camp who had the highest vulnerability and get them into the and stabilized within the village. Um, Old Public Community Services, or OPCS, then provides the behavioral health services, primarily addiction treatment and case management, that people may or may not want. So everyone is expected to participate in housing navigation. So how can we help you get into another housing situation that's more permanent than this? And for some of us, that's shelter. For some of them, that's permanent housing. For some of them, that's resolving homelessness through reconnecting with family or friends and having someplace that's longer term that they can stay in. Um, so far, we've been around about 9 months, and we have served 83 women, and we have consistently, pretty typical of who we have historically worked with. More than half of everyone we're serving has a mixture of different conditions that are happening, mental health disorders, addiction, chronic physical health conditions. And not surprisingly, out of that 83, 69 of the women that came identified as having been involved in or a victim of, survivor of domestic violence. And so you've just got a whole bunch of stuff happening, right, that is very destabilizing. And the idea is that through this site, people would be able to stabilize and move on to other locations. So far, we've had 63 people leave, and about 21% to 35%, on how you measure it, are positive exits. So the 21% is more permanent housing. The 35% includes folks who maybe went to shelter or other locations. I mention that because oftentimes, kind of the gold standard for the work we do, which makes sense, is people moving to a tenant-based, lease in their name apartment. But this is just the very beginning journey for a lot of the women that we're working with. So getting into a accessible shelter that will allow them to recover from the elements and be able to keep their pet and get their basic needs met while we continue to navigate them into permanent housing is also a real success for the women. So we don't want to negate that success just because it isn't a lease or permanent housing at that point. Um, so that's kind of the overview of who we are. I think it's valuable, and I think we heard this when we were in New Mexico, which I think really resonated with our team as we were trying to devise this. And as a CEO, this has been an evolution for me, having worked in this now since around 2013. I, I didn't expect that we would necessarily, back in 2013, I did not expect that we would have to figure out these types of innovative services. I know Nicole's team and our team would rather everyone be in an apartment with a lease. That's really what we're shooting for. That's whatever we want to call that, the standard. And we haven't abandoned that, but we also recognize I have the fortune to be on our Regional Affordable Housing Commission. And after extensive research over the last few years, it's really clear that Pima County and the city of Tucson are working towards having a supply of affordable housing that meets the need for those folks who are unsheltered and are extremely low income. However, it's also very clear that it's going to take, with concerted effort, up to 10 years to get there. And that's with the funding and the effort that we currently have in place. And so somehow we have to do something in between, right? Somehow we have to help people stay alive and stay well so that they can get to the end of that journey of permanent housing. And so that's sort of the energy or the perspective that we have entered into this work. And hopefully we will be able to expand this to help more people, because we always know we have not saturated the market of that needs this service or work and are nowhere near close to that. So we know that scaling up and growing is an important piece of the overall solution to homelessness. So that's my spiel, kind of. And now I should have different hats for this. Now I'm going to be the moderator for a moment. Um, but before I do that, I didn't know, Nicole, if there's anything in addition that you maybe have before we go into moderation. Not saying there should be, but sometimes people, okay, perfect. Sometimes people, oh, I just thought of this one thing after I said something that they thought of presenting. So we've got some questions, and if you have questions in the audience, we'll have at least 15 minutes for questions at the end if we didn't really cover something that you had. And at that point in time, because I'm easily distracted, at that point in time, I will look at the chat and open that up and moderate people's questions. You can put them in there at any time. Just know I'm not looking at it, because if I did, I would be horribly distracted. Um, so I think the first question that we had about um, this is, and I sort of answered it already for Star Village, but what kind of factors led Community of Hope to develop a outdoor space like this, rather than another shelter model, or what was it that really led you to do this?
Sure, it's a great question. We decided to do this at the particular time. There were two things that were happening. We had just sort of unprecedented violence against our unhoused neighbors during this particular time. We had a bunch of youth who were throwing rocks at homeless. They would find their camps, throw rocks at people. They also were burning people out of their tents at one of the local lakes that people were. It's called Burn Lake. There's no lake anymore, but our clients would camp out there, and they were coming and setting fire to them in the middle of the night. So we were just really concerned about that. At the same time, we had an overly enthusiastic city employee who arbitrarily decided to start enforcing the curfew of emptying the campus, because we were having a lot of people sleeping here on this property because they want to wake up and have the services immediately. They can have bathrooms, they can have access to healthcare and food, and this is a safe zone for them. So even like one of our clients who was elderly, who was bleeding from head to toe, being pounded by rocks, walked his bike over and stayed the night on the campus. And so we realized that we wanted to sort of formalize something here at the Community of Hope. Now, directly across the street from us, we have the Gospel Rescue Mission. So we do have a shelter very, very close to us. But they are very high barrier. And so that led to a lot of people still being outside. A lot of people, as Tom mentioned, have pets and companion animals. And we wanted to have a more low barrier option, and a way to accept people with their companion animals and couples. And I think, at that time, the Community of Hope was really advancing housing programs. So I did look at the chat, but I'll try to stay away from that so I can be in here. But I have been here for 20 years. So at the time, I had been the housing programs manager. We had one housing program. Now I we have something like 15 different types of housing programs. Um, and I came on to help, grow the housing opportunities. And so, when we decided, we knew that the city was going to start enforcing that curfew. And so we started having what we were calling great conversations. We had this gentleman who would come in and moderate um, these meetings, the great conversations every Tuesday morning at 10, which we still carry on with that through today. And so they would, he'd said, what's going on here? What are the issues? And they said, well, we're about to get kicked off overnight. We don't know where to go. It's not safe out there. So every Tuesday, we met and we start talking about some solutions. And, we just had three people that really were like, pitched this idea of having a tent city and took it to council. And the council approved it because they didn't have any other option. And the Community of Hope felt that building a brick and mortar shelter wasn't the answer. We really wanted to keep people safe, but we wanted that homelessness to be brief and get people into housing as an option. And so we had experience in running a family shelter, which is actually where I entered. I came in to run a 10-month grant out at the family shelter before another organization was going to take it over. And they were unable to, the day before the key exchange, backed out of taking over that family shelter. And the director said, you can't leave. I'd already had two going away parties, but I couldn't leave the families with nobody to assist with that. And I said, well, maybe we could try housing the families, because I just see people being stagnant in the shelter, in the brick and mortar kind of, lifestyle. And we're spending a lot of money to keep people homeless. Can we use this money to house people and, help get get them back out into the community? And so we talked to our representatives and I learned how to do rental calculations, how to flirt with landlords, all the fun things of like making sure that we could get people housed. And I housed every family out
Yeah.
of that family shelter. And I only had one family that kept coming back needing a lot of assistance. And I was like, let's do more of this. So let's focus on housing. And so started doing that. So
Mhm.
I had been doing that for 6 years and we started Camp Hope. So in a way, I was like, oh, this is feeling a little bit backwards. But then, we started Camp Hope, and 2 weeks later, I moved from being the housing programs manager to the director. So I was straddling both positions, and really just realized the immediate benefits of operating that safe space in the way that we were doing it, while also offering services and housing opportunities.
That's fascinating. So you were going to be there for 10 months. And how long ago was that?
Well, that was, yeah, 20 years ago.
Uh, yeah, I had a job like that where I started and I thought I would just make it through the academy. I'd get some good exercise and then I'd leave. 20 years later, I retired.
Yep.
Uh, I kept thinking one more week, right? Um, that's fascinating. And I got to admit, I've never thought of flirting with landlords, and maybe I should try that. I don't know.
It
Yeah.
felt like speed dating. I learned a lot about, inspections and how to do all the things and sweet talk them into, extra deposits and damages and control and all of that. So, yeah.
It is a bureaucracy. I came into this work from retiring from a career in state government, and I realized I knew nothing about bureaucracy until I had to deal with HUD applications and HUD grants and HUD policies and continuum of cares. And I mean, you almost need 5 years just to get your head even around it in some way, shape, or form. The complexity and the bureaucracy around this could be very tricky. I would have never expected that coming into this work. Um, yeah, it's fascinating. And it's interesting. I think we have a similar debate. You mentioned the brick and mortar. We have now some low barrier or accessible shelter, and I'm glad because we were able to use existing spaces, in our case, a retired firehouse, to turn it into that kind of facility. But the idea of big shelters sometimes I think is appealing as an administrator for me. Like this is something I could maybe sell to the community to get involved in. But in the same sense, it's very expensive. And we could help a lot more people move into permanent housing with that money. And the shelter is, if there isn't permanent housing, it's not really getting them into that next step. And it's one of the most expensive levels of care that you can have. So I think that's similar kind of in our situation here. We realize that in any given day, we might have 2,500, 2,800 people living on the streets. So we want to help them, but the cost of building 2,500 shelter beds in brick and mortar would be extremely expensive. Even half of that, a fourth of that gets very expensive very quickly. And we need that money for gap funding for construction of actual affordable housing for people then to use vouchers to lease. So that balance, and I think even for us, if we do expand, we're looking at the potential of expanding this type of model in Tucson as an organization. And the our city council has actually made a housing emergency a declaration, and with that, then provided new regulations for shelters to include outdoor spaces, which then makes it less expensive to actually do that. And so, really, I think that if we're going to try and help a considerable number of people, that scaling up has to be inexpensive. If we spend too much money here, we can never spend money to get to the goal. And I think that's part of what's kept us from building something huge, because we know that if we can find temporary ways of doing it, we won't need this when we get more people housed, and it just makes more sense. And it seems as if that's what's been kind of going through your thinking also.
Yeah, that's a part of it. I think also too, just the misunderstanding that if you build it, then it's going to be full. And what we've seen, is that my organization doesn't necessarily want to operate a brick and mortar shelter. We do want to operate Camp Hope, but if, say, something that we've faced recently, like a newly elected mayor, new police chief who are and new federal administration who is really focusing on sheltering instead of housing. And so if that were to become the case here, it would make sense that Community of Hope would operate that shelter at that heavy price tag. But I just argue that we have a lot of folks that if they could go into the mission, they would. And I would anticipate that a lot of my funding would have to come from the city, and it would come with a lot of rules and make it a high barrier shelter. So while I'm operating Camp Hope, I can operate it in a way that is safe but has low barrier. And so I just think that, again, a lot of people just think like, oh, we just need another shelter, and then all these people, we won't see them. And it doesn't mean that if you build a shelter that those are the folks that are going to go into that shelter.
That's a really good point. I think definitely one of the things I first learned in this work was that and there's this great benefit, I think sometimes there's drawbacks too, but benefit to going into something that you don't really have the history and experience. So I came from a therapeutic clinical side of this work, and not with folks who were experiencing homelessness. And so as I became involved, it was confusing to me, very, very surprising in our county to find in 2013 that, and this is still astounding to me, that back in 20, well, actually, yeah, 2013, I guess, we had as many beds open in shelters and transitional housings as we had people living on the streets. It was like, well, wait a minute. How
Right.
could this be possible? But everyone around the table, somehow it seemed to make sense to them. And to me, it was like, well, this is bizarre. Can't we just get in vans and find those people and put them in those beds? And poof, boy, this is a heck, the job's done. Um, well, that was back when we had a few hundred people living on the streets. That's obviously changed dramatically, but we still have too many beds available because traditional high barrier shelters just aren't intended to serve folks who are unsheltered with all of these other chronic conditions happening, who first need, safety and stability, and then can work on all these other things. But they have to be able to get that access to safety and stability first. Um, Very fortunate that when we switched our model back in around 2014 or 15, and it's such a nicer way to work, that as long as someone isn't a harm to themselves or others, they're welcome, and they have to be an immediate harm. I learned I had to do that qualification because someone might say, well, they they punched someone a year ago. Yeah, that was a year ago. Are they punching anyone today? Do they have any intention to punch anyone? Did they say they're going to punch anyone? So to try and really get down to no, it's about the condition we're seeing right now today. And then, of course, I love animals, so having the furry friends around is just amazing and wonderful and really improves the workforce, the experience for everyone. It's always rewarding. So yeah, we're very fortunate that the city of Tucson started a housing first department and we're some of the first low barrier shelters. And then we started our first low barrier shelter and just, being able to actually help people who are the most in need, who are the most likely to perish on the streets if there isn't some sort of intervention that helps with climate control and food and access to care, to access to medical services and things like that. So, but yeah, it was astounding to me that we would have empty beds, and we not as much anymore, but we still have empty beds. Do you still see that sort of thing in your community?
We have a waiting list for Camp Hope, but there are a lot of open beds across the street. And again, I know
Yeah.
some of that has to do with, the barriers, the animals, the curfews, the religion. There are a lot of, they also drug test, but I think there's also that little piece of just, the autonomy of having, this non-congregate option for people, so that they feel like they have their own space and they're not just in a huge room with a lot of other people. So I think the way that we designed that, using the input from people with lived experience, has been really meaningful, that we see time and time again that they choose to be in their own space rather than a high barrier congregate shelter with other folks.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's we found similarly here in Tucson. It was curious when I didn't know anything about shelters, and at the time, a lot of them don't operate quite this way anymore. Some still do, but they people would come in at night, say 4 or 5 p.m., and then they'd stay overnight and they'd get dinner and then they'd stay overnight, get breakfast, and then they'd have to leave during the day,
Mhm.
which I didn't understand why, but I guess operationally, that's definitely one way to keep your operational costs down. But it was really damaging for the community. So now you've got 100 people going through your neighborhood to get into the shelter at 5, and then you've got 100 people leaving at 7 or 8 in the morning. And the shelter is saying, well, you can't bring any of these items in. So then people are hiding those items in your neighborhood. So one of the first things I think we did was we just explored, and I just find this fascinating when the process of kind of saying, well, what's the value? What does it matter? Why do we care if someone leaves at 11 at night to go get a soda? Why does it matter if they leave? Why does it matter if they have their cell phone or don't? If they haven't caused any trouble with it, what difference does it make? And at the same time, it was better for the community and helping communities that we've entered to understand that we're not going to do this. We're not here to make things worse. We're here to make things better. So you don't want 100 people coming in and out, and I get that. So people can come and go when they should come and go based on their needs. And once you start working in that model, it's like, oh, this is so much, in some ways, easier, so much less fighting, so much less. And we don't see a lot of problems with that. That's not, these were just traditions, right?
Yeah, I think, as we were establishing what our Camp Hope agreements were, we really had to do that again with the people who were staying at the camp, who we found were a lot more restrictive, like, I want this as a rule, this should be a rule. And we just had to really like keep thinking like, what's our capacity or desire to follow up with consequences on some of those things? Like, and we just found that I don't care when if somebody came in at midnight or if somebody came in at 9:30 or 6:30. Those so we just had to really question. It's easy to make the rules, but then you have to think about those consequences. And, just something that I've always thought about as we've done like, housing first programs and things like that. Like, don't want to be expelling anyone for the same reason that I brought them in, so thinking about like we understand, some of the challenges that folks are facing when they're living outside or in crisis, and not making a rule for every little thing there.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I came into this field in the 1980s, late 80s, and because I'm old. And, back then we in the treatment side of the work in behavioral health, people were still getting kicked out of treatment for basically expressing the symptoms and the adaptations that were part of the disease that they had. It's like, well, this
Right.
is, and it's the kind of thing that I think first as a counselor I didn't see, but then when your eyes are open to it, it's like, well, yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. This person came to us because they have a drug addiction problem, and now we're kicking them out because they use drugs.
Right. Right.
Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but these traditions just kind of find their way in and beyond logic. I think it's good for the clients we serve, but I've also found it to be very good for me and for our organization to let some of those things go, those things that don't build value and don't create wellness. Why hang on to them? Yeah. All right. I probably have some other questions. I'm always guilty of having questions that I don't ask. The any successes or any surprises, lessons learned, that sort of thing that you think from this work? So you've been at it longer than us.
Oh no, next question. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. This was something that, I often think like, man, we didn't have to do this. Like we're doing this because it's working and it's been amazing for our community and for the people who are accessing services at Camp Hope. I get asked often, when people do tours or I give presentations, well, what is your success rate? And I know what they're asking me. And you touched on this, that they want to know how many people got into housing or got sober, or that those are like the measures of success. I am not saying that those are not measures of success, but as somebody who, again, was here running housing programs and a day shelter before we had Camp Hope, I would, ride my bike in and come around the back side of the building to enter back here with my bike. And on a weekly basis, there would be a woman waiting to tell me about a sexual assault or something that had happened over during the night when we didn't have Camp Hope. When we started Camp Hope, I don't have women waiting for me on the back porch anymore. And I have a lot of women who have found independence at Camp Hope because they get their own shelter, they get their own space, they get the wraparound services. To me, that's a huge success. It's also a huge success to have people in my backyard not getting picked up for trespassing or getting fines for trespassing or getting, assaulted in any kind of way outside of Camp Hope. Because we do want to look at some of the other measures of success. I would say I've when I was the housing programs manager and becoming the director, it used to take a long time sometimes for me to house people because I don't know where they were. So I'd be driving along the Rio Grande, I'd be going out to the mountains, trying to find so and so because it was their turn for housing. But when we put Camp Hope into effect, I was housing people so quickly. It was less than 30 days because they were right in my backyard. Or like when they had a Social Security appointment, I was going right out to the backyard and transitioning folks quickly, getting them their income much more quickly. Those have been huge successes. Another unintended consequence that I think is really positive is that it really gave the community an opportunity to interact in a lot of different ways. So we saw our financial donations skyrocket. The community agreed, like, we want you to help people and we want you to do it close to all the services. And then they also started to provide a lot more tangible donations. So, clothing and hygiene items and household items, so that once we moved somebody from Camp Hope into their own apartment, we could give them their best foot forward with tables and dressers and things that had been donated. So we didn't feel like, oh man, we can't afford to do this or the community doesn't believe in this. It was very apparent that the community was like, this is great. Please keep doing it. And then also keep that eye on the housing piece while you're doing it. So I think that those, have been some of the things that I have seen have been successful. I would even say, just anecdotally, like oftentimes we will move people into their own housing and they will come back and volunteer because we always have somebody that's on duty, that's a resident, that's checking in with the guards, making sure when people come in that they're registered at Camp Hope, that we don't have anybody unregistered coming in, that keeping incident reports low and writing those up when they have to. So we've just seen so many different types of success in having Camp Hope, the important ones that people want to see, and then the ones that we know are the right thing and the humane thing to do for people who really need the help. And we get a lot of feedback from the people that we're serving that they don't know what they would be doing if it weren't for a place like Camp Hope. all I can do is imagine how hard it might be, especially, like right now, when it's 103 degrees. What are they going to do tonight? What if they have an animal? Um, they're all in distress when it's, this hot and there's not a safe place to go. So I think about those things as making sure that I'm capturing what I think the success is, and capturing what the clients are telling me they think is leading to their success. Um, I would say some of the challenges that I've seen, at Camp Hope, it's challenging managing a lot of people in crisis. But for the most part, I'm just, always blown away by the resilience of the people that we serve, that it's still going this long. Yes, I wish we did not have to have a place like Camp Hope. And I get asked all the time to expand it. But again, I want to make sure that I'm not taking away from those housing opportunities, and keep an eye on doing that. But while we're working with a lot of people, I think one of the biggest challenges we see at Camp Hope, that's one that I know is a challenge everywhere, whether you're a safe outdoor space or a brick and mortar shelter, or even providing housing, would be hoarding issues. Those can be real issues with people that we are working with. There is no, silver bullet for addressing that. But we're grateful that we can do it while we're here, because we are the landlord and we have much looser controls. Now we do have, again, we're on City of Las Cruces property, so I have to keep a lot of those things in mind, and keep those things in check. And those are just some of the things that, again, with really great supportive service providers, they're working with them the minute we start to see that happening. And we have some rules around, you're on your tent pad site, all of your things have to stay on your tent pad site. And I think as long as we're continuing to nurture the service relationship that we have with the people that are staying there, we've been able to navigate that, and even try to, put some practices into place before we move somebody into their own apartment, in addressing something like hoarding. But it has been something that we have struggled with here and there, that I have heard that other organizations have struggled with as well. But that we've also just been able to turn it into a positive experience for the people that we're serving at Camp Hope.
I have to say the one thing that really surprised me and really moved me when I went to see Camp Hope was the leadership by the residents, and not just to engage in any work, but also to engage in meaningful work that required some level of responsibility and trust. And yeah, it really struck me, and I really came back, and that's, one of the only probably things that I just couldn't get out of my head. And we're trying to replicate some of that in our work here. And I think the success of outdoor spaces like that, that'll be critical to do that. And will also, I think, improves quality of life and outcomes probably for the people that live there. I think it's hard to live life without meaning and purpose, but also drives costs down and makes it so we can serve more people. And I think over the years, probably because I came from the, clinical patient kind of side of the work historically, didn't really see the engagement and the autonomy and responsibility and partnership that you can have with folks who are also experiencing the conditions that you're supporting, treating, serving, helping. Um, and so that was a real eye opener for me. And we have certainly not mastered that, but we're really looking at all of we have 11 different locations of different types of housing and services, but to try and figure out, how do we encourage, and how do we have expectations that people will give back to the community they're in, and and to help staff understand that doesn't mean just because this person isn't able to right now, because a lot of people come in, they're pretty disordered, they're not ready for that maybe, and it's up to them to decide. Some are, but it's up to them to decide when. But that doesn't, it's staff can sometimes have the hard judgment around, well, what's a rule and what isn't a rule and what do you do about it, versus an expectation that we expect it, but we also know that it's not going to always happen. And not everyone is going to be able to do this at the same level or time as everyone else. But just the energy that I saw that created at your location is something we definitely want to have here. And it gives me hope because I think sometimes I've tried today not to say the word vulnerable because although that's designed to kind of bring attention to the needs and the danger that people are in, people are also, it makes it sound as if people are somehow weak or unable to care for themselves. And that's entirely not true. They are very strong and able to be autonomous and make decisions. If you can do that living on the streets, that's hard and that takes real, hard work every day. And so then when they came into our services or shelter, we were just like, oh yeah, you don't have to do anything. And that wasn't, I think, serving them. So trying to make that shift, I think, is important. Um, yeah, and yeah, so that was inspirational, I think, to me and to us.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think the only thing I would have to add to that is that, I think it's been part of us just, yeah, recognizing the resilience in the clients that they're their own experts. And sometimes they just need us to show them there are other ways or other opportunities, and encourage them and support them. So many are just told no over and over. And there's an opportunity to say, like, listen, you're going to have some shared responsibility here. And then some real consistency. So they know every Tuesday at 10 a.m. they're going to get to talk to the staff, air any grievances or what's working, what's not working, and work those things out as an entire camp, whoever wants to show up. And then every Thursday, my staff meets with the safety team, the people who have that shared responsibility, who has the keys to the toilet paper, who is making sure people are volunteering some time. We don't require them to do service. Again, it's that expectation. There are also some legalities around that. If we were to require 6 hours of service, then it could be said that that's in lieu of rent. And then I would have to court order evict everyone that came through Camp Hope. And we're just not in a position to
Uh,
want to do that or to even try to do that. So we really encourage people. But I think it's just knowing, that we're saying, like, we trust you. I hope you trust us. And if you keep this running, we'll keep running it. And so we've just found, here we are in 2026, still operating it successfully. And we've had several people pass through, that have just passed on the spirit of the camp and its intent.
yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. And we have found that with the expectation, people are pretty quick. They want something to do. People
Yeah.
want They want to be part of something. Humans seem to want to be part of something and to do things that have purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, I also noticed that when we went out to campsites, we had large encampments in Tucson. Very quickly in those encampments, everyone has responsibilities. And so it's not like, some people have to get water for the day. There are things that need to be done, and they enjoy being able to support the community and to be able to do that as part of that community. Otherwise, they just go off by themselves, I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I do see a question in there. Can you see the chat
I
from
can.
Gary?
Yes.
Fortunately for you, it's a multi-part question. Uh,
All right. I think I've answered some of it. So,
yes.
yeah, a lot has definitely happened in the 20 years that I've been here. Like I said, we probably had about 12 staff. I have 44 now. We own properties. We also have lots of the vouchers and things. But in terms of, when I am asked to, like, give advice on if another community is trying to do something like a safe outdoor space, um, you know, I I think that for us, it's been really important that it was tied to a nonprofit and that does have those housing connections. So sometimes I've heard that other agencies that have tried to do something like this as a standalone, tent city or camp somewhere, maybe deploying services there. Depending on how that is set up, there can be some capacity issues with that. It doesn't mean it can't be successful, but make sure that that's part of your design and your plan so that you can talk about things like how you plan to get service connection to people and to get them housing opportunities. I think that's been really important. And then even just, the unglamorous thing of, okay, how are we going to have the funding provide the insurance for something like a camp. I have, over the last several years, it's been harder and harder to find companies that will insure something like Camp Hope. So I get denied by several different types often. So that can be difficult. You also don't want it to be far away from, services or the community. People are still going to want to take buses or go downtown or, go to appointments, things like that. So making sure that you're designing having something that uh, clients aren't going to have to find a way to get somewhere 4 miles out of town on the other side of the tracks to get the services and the help that they need. So I think that those connections are really important when you think about that. I think I've talked about some of the pitfalls. Funding can be always questionable. But so far for us, again, our community, we've just seen that as a real benefit, one of the positive unintended consequence that we've seen here. Sometimes it can take a long time to transition someone to housing. Like our longest resident at Camp Hope, people would be like, how long are people staying? And in the beginning, we would go back and forth on implementing these timelines. And ultimately, I was like, arbitrarily, I'm going to, again, send this woman out after 3 months when there's still no housing available. So we don't have a time frame because this is on our own dime. This, is something that we have decided to take on without, federal assistance or state or city, and other than having the property. So, um, I in that way, we're able to nurture people while they're here and try to get them to move on. But our longest resident was a female and she was here for 7 years. So
Oh, wow.
sometimes it can be very difficult. But again, I think that, she just kept saying every time we try to introduce a housing opportunity, somebody deserves it more than I do. I'm going back to Colorado anyway. It was always, what we got. And to me, it was almost like a compliment. Like she felt so safe at Camp Hope. That she was really like doing what she needed to for herself at that time. And so I just try to instill in the staff that it's our job to be ready when they say they are ready and to encourage them along the way. So we're not just kicking back and, waiting. It's every day we're going out and being like, hey, ultimately like the way that we finally were able to transition her into, and she's been in housing now, I think probably about the same time, about 7 years now. Um, as we tried all these different tactics, and the one that eventually worked, at least for this particular client, is we just started saying like, oh, look, we found these awesome pillows for when you get your new apartment. Oh, look, a microwave came in today, and just sort of started to do it in that way, and found her a unit that was next to a former camp manager. And so, it's just really being open to what those transitions look like for your clients too, and providing that space that's safe, and then encouraging them to find a more permanent destination.
True. We've had very similar experience in our work here in Tucson. And yeah, it's interesting how traditions, I guess I'll say, of the system had this sort of, oh, we're a 90-day program, we're this, we're that, versus no, we're going to kind of ride the wave and see what is the right thing to do at this point in time. And for some clients, that may be a longer stay. For some clients, that's a shorter stay, but there's autonomy in it. And I'm a very systems business kind of looking at things person. Exiting someone at 90 days when they're 30 days away from success potentially is just starting over. It's not a good use of resources. It's not anything we would do in any other industry. So why do it in ours? It doesn't, I've got one of those. If it only makes sense in a nonprofit, maybe it just doesn't make sense. And trying to really kind of get rid of that. And I do have the benefit of not having worked in nonprofits initially in my career or in homelessness, so I didn't have to get rid of some of those. Um, I think for us, one of the pitfalls, one of the things that I hear a fair amount about in the work, and especially because we've been so focused on permanent housing for so many years, and rightfully so, um, is that somebody out there might think that this is better. And I would initially, when we started this work, get questions from um, reporters and others on, why do you think this is the best model for Tucson? And I would have to find a way of saying, well, I don't think I necessarily say it that way. This is what's needed in Tucson right now and what people need because they're being assaulted, like you said, they're being harmed, they're at risk. We have safety issues, we have all these other things happening, and we do not have the low barrier shelter and permanent housing available for them today or near enough. So this is something we have to do. Um, and we're going to try and do it in the very best way we can. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of balance, but I don't want someone to say, "Oh, we could start saving money. We don't have to do anything but this." Not what we're shooting for. I saw a comment that there's something about comments or questions in Q&A, but I got to tell you, I'm pretty old school. I'm not sure what the Q&A is.
Yep,
Uh,
there's
it,
a, oh, sorry, Nicole.
the more
Um, I was just going to mention there are two questions in our Q&A tab. One is from Jen, and it reads, any anticipated changes in programming or service strategy for those who may be covered slash offered to those who are or eligible to be enrolled in access slash Medicaid programs?
Jen, that's a heck of a question. I mean, for us, so we're currently doing that. So people are eligible for primarily most of them for Medicaid or as we call in Arizona, access. And so we are providing those services and billing those costs to access to reduce the costs that we actually have to bill to the city. I don't know, Nicole, if you have a similar structure or.
we don't bill Medicaid. We're not a Medicaid billing agency. It's possible we will become one, especially as we see some federal changes. But for now, we're mostly grant operated.
Um, See another one that now that I've found that there is this thing called Q&A. Thanks, Gabby. Uh, um, oh, so where are you?
We are literally over the tracks. um, we're like 1 mile from the downtown area in sort of an little bit more of an industrial area, but there is a cemetery to the south of us. And then we do have some residences in between us and the downtown area, but we're really close to downtown. We're also very close to, um, we're on arterial streets, people that are highly trafficked areas. And we also are very, very close to the intermodal transportation system. So you can catch the buses very close to where Camp Hope is. And it's again literally right outside my window. So it's tied to our organization.
Yes, you can look out. It's right there. I was also kind of surprised by that. And you make a good point about having it near services, which is something thinking about and how to make it more effective here as we consider more of these. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. And if anyone wants to go to Las Cruces and see what they're doing, of course, Mesilla, I used to have family that lived there for 20 years, has some fantastic food. So yeah, stay overnight and get some good food. Don't do that. If you're in Tucson, don't do that up and back thing. Just stay overnight, get some good food. It's a wonderful community.
Get your chili fix. Yeah. And I'm always happy to, talk more with folks that are trying to do stuff like this, give tours. I feel like it's really important. I know that we have a unique setup here and not everyone has that, but we all start somewhere. And so I just feel like we all have a responsibility to take care of our own. And if there's anything that I can share to help communities do that, happy to do it.
Well, you are doing amazing work. And we, again, this is probably the second or third time we've pulled from your time and resources. So we appreciate it. It's very kind of you to do this. And I imagine you might have follow-up questions I'm sure people can reach out after this. And yeah, I always wish you the best. And I think last year we came like near summer. So if we ever come back, we should come in the winter, not in the summer.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yep, as you did, everyone's got so high tech. Your email is in the chat. I would never have even thought of that. Yeah. So anyways, I thank you very much. Any parting or comments?
All of you, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Stay hydrated. And we'll see you again at our next one, probably next month or right around there. So thank you.